Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should. And please check out insightsinsound.com for a full list of our podcasts and YouTube series.
And big thanks to our sponsors, Mackie, Roland, Mojave Audio, Ozbot.
My guest is Malcolm Toft. He is the founder of, the co-founder of Trident Audio Developments. Your significant beginnings were as the head engineer at Trident Studios, but I know you go back before that even.
Yeah, I was the very first employee at Trident Studios, the very first engineer they employed. I got my job going to the opening party. That's how I blagged my way, as we say in English. I blagged my way into the job. They were looking for, I'd heard on the grapevine, excuse me, they were looking for an engineer. And I was working as a second engineer at CBS Studios in London and couldn't climb up the tree. It was kind of my way was blocked. So, I was only 22 years of age. And I got invited. I just, by a happen chance, a friend of mine was going to the opening party. I'd never heard of Trident. He just said that his new studio opening had got an 8-track recorder, which I couldn't believe.
That was huge back then. Yeah, exactly.
It was. Well, we only had 4 tracks. Didn't even know one existed. So I just went along to the party and it was absolutely heaving. There were thousands of people there. And I found myself in a room with one of the owners, Barry Sheffield. And he just said, who you guys, where are you from? And I said, I'm from CBS. What do you do? I'm an engineer. And literally, I was there for 15 minutes. And Barry said, is anyone looking for a job? And, you remember these moments in your life, don't you? And I just kind of went, maybe, And I thought, no more. I didn't no more of it. No more of it, Daniel. I went home, to my mum and dad.
Uh-huh.
And then 3 days later, there was a phone call to the reception at CBS Studios, and it was Barry. And he said, were you serious about that job? And I went, yeah, I went along after work, and they sat me in front of this spaceship of a console, this Sound Techniques console, and asked me to do a mix. And I did this mix. And the next minute, I got the offer of a job. And I didn't know whether I was going to have a job for 6 months, a year, 10 years, or nothing. It was a complete leap of faith because the studio just opened, And in 6 months, we'd recorded Hey Jude,
Now, let me ask you, as far as I understand it, most studios in those days were corporate owned by the labels, right? I mean,
absolutely they were. You had Decca Records, you had CBS, you had Pi Studios, you had EMI Studios, of course. Yeah, they were all the major studios were owned by record labels because it makes sense, because it saves the money in the recording process.
Sure.
So there were a few small studios that would maybe specialize in film work or voice work or doing demos. Most of them were just demo studios with, smaller facilities. And that's how I started off at a demo studio in London. And I started off recording on 1/4-inch tape, recording the backing track on 1/4-inch tape, copying it onto another 1/4-inch tape machine in mono, adding the vocal as I went. That's how we did it,
Of course.
So
Yeah.
I learned how to balance. I learned how to hear things in my ears, and I learned how to balance on the go. And it was a very small studio with very limited resources. The talkback button was a door buzzer. That's how limited it. Yeah, it was a doorbell.
I love it.
It was a 6-channel mixer, high-low shelving EQ. The reverb we had was a Hammond spring hanging from the ceiling. That was our reverb. That was the one. But the guy there was very intense. He was a drummer, and he taught me what microphones to use, microphone technique, how to get soloing facilities, no muting facilities. So I trained my ears to hone in on the bass or hone in on the guitar or hone in on the snare drum to hear if there was distortion, to get the balance. So, it was a true apprenticeship, a true apprenticeship. And that's how we learned back in the day,
Well, now, and I understand it. Yeah. And as I understand it now, the equivalent in the States at that point, a lot of these people were telephone engineers. They came from Western Electric and companies like that, right? That's
Yeah,
basically telephony was the origin of a lot of this technology.
yeah. I got in because I played a typical kid, in England, war-torn, bombed England. It's pretty austere after the war, and I was a war baby. So when I grew up, there was very little to do, and what happened was I heard the devil's music. I heard Elvis Presley, and I heard Chuck Berry, and this for us kids, it just took us out of the drabness of our lives.
Sure.
Because we saw you guys in the States, you had these huge, you know, fish-tailed cars and hot rods, and you had these great TV programs, and we were living in Britain with black and white television, having to make the best of what we got. And the thing that took us all these kids, and you could talk to Pete Townsend of The Who, and you could talk to Johnny, could talk to all these people. They had the same background, and they heard rock and roll music from the States, and we made it our own. We took it to heart so much, and that's how the Beatles started, and all of them started. And I started a band, got a guitar, begged my dad to get a guitar, learned a few chords.
Like you do. Yeah.
As you do. And when I was 14, we wanted to make a demo recording. And I went into the studio, and that just changed my life because I heard sound properly. Another interesting thing to remember back in those days is that we heard our records, our 78 records or our 45 records, on our mum and dad's radiogram, which had an elliptical speaker 7x4. So you never heard bass and you never heard treble. You just heard all the mid-range, right?
Yeah.
So I go into this studio with a 12-inch bass speaker, a woofer and a tweeter, and I hear bass for the first time on a record. And it blew my mind. And I thought, I want to be part of it. And that started my whole career. I wanted to be involved in that whole process of making records, of creating sound and controlling it. And that's what started me off,
I can so relate to that because even when I came into the studios, that was, you just fall in love with the process. You fall in love with the twinkly lights and everything. It just mesmerizes you, doesn't it?
Oh, it did, And in that studio, we weren't allowed to use our amplifiers. We had to plug into jack sockets in the wall, and the guy put it straight into the desk.
Mm-hmm.
And then we heard our guitars through headphones with reverb and whatever. But the sound, and I still got those demo recordings, and the sound that we heard, was amazing. Nothing, and I thought, this is what I want to do. I knew that anything I did at school was not going to prepare me for this. So, there was nothing I could do at school. There's no good taking an electronics degree or anything like that. So I just, banged on doors when I left school. You just have to be really tenacious. And I just banged on doors until I got a job, Well,
and that's an interesting point that you raised there, was that there were no manuals. There was no real...
No. I mean, today, of course, you can go on YouTube, you can learn, you can do whatever. But back in the day, you had to serve an apprenticeship. And it was that old catch-22. You couldn't get a job in the studio unless you had experience. You couldn't get experience unless you had a job.
Sure.
Which is why in England, we have this tea-boy routine. I've never really heard of this, but got into a studio by being a tea-boy, making tea.
Yeah.
And all the great engineers, Roy Thomas Baker, Ken Scott, Mike Stone, all the great engineers, even Jeff Emmerich, they would have started off as a go-for, very lowly down the chain. And you waited your opportunity until someone moved on or someone looked at you and thought, hey, that guy's got a bit of, way about them. They could maybe work with clients. And that's how you got on. There was no golden ticket. You had to do the work. You had to put it in.
Sure. And there were, of course, no recording schools or anything like that.
Nothing at all. Yeah. But you look at the engineers that came out of Trident. I mean, my God, Roy Thomas Baker had worked at Declan before, Ken Scott had worked at EMI, but they really got their chance at Trident Studios, And I don't know whether you know of a producer called Spike Stent.
Of course.
Grammy Award-winning producer who's running Madonna.
Yeah.
Goodness knows what. And I had the pleasure of meeting Spike a few years ago. He bought one of my power supplies. And I'm just talking to him on the phone. I didn't know him. And I said, Spike, I said, what's your favorite console? You know, expecting to say S18. And he said, a Trident Series 18. And I said, pardon? And he said, yeah. He said, I worked at Trident Studios. I got my first job at Trident Studios in the 80s. He started off as a teen boy, you know. And all these people have all come through, so many engineers and producers have just come through Trident. It was an amazing starting ground, because the great thing about Trident was they gave people a chance. There's so many guys who started off as teen boys, Dave Henschel, Mike Stone, as I say, loads of guys, Dennis Mackay, all started as teen boys, but were recognised for their talent and given a chance. Not just kept down, they were given a chance. And that's the great thing about Trident Studios. It was a great breeding ground. And they gave me a chance, you know, in the sense of allowing me to build consoles, you know.
Now, let's talk about the early days of that studio, because as you say, it was really, it was almost, you were employee number one. So you walked into essentially a decrepit building that was not even really a studio at that point, right?
No, it was, by the time I joined it was after the opening party. So it was built. It was ready to go. I joined about 2 or 3 weeks before they really opened the doors.
Okay.
And I joined in the March of 1968. I joined in the March, and I think it was by the end of March, I think I did my first session, which was one of the guys from the Animals, the keyboard player from the Animals, did a session with him. You know, and it was literally July, August that we did Hey Jude. I mean, that's how quick.
Wow.
That's how quick it happened.
Yeah. Now, in those days, of course, they had the old Sound Workshop consoles, right?
Sound Techniques.
Sound Techniques, yes, of course.
Sound Techniques. It's an English company. And it started with the Sound Techniques console. Yeah. We started with an 8-track Sound Techniques. That was the one I started on. Then when we moved to 16-track, we moved the 8-track up to a mix room that we opened up on the next floor, second or third floor. And then we put a 16-track Sound Techniques in. And there were a lot of problems with the 16-track Sound Techniques console. It was very unreliable. There were all sorts of gremlins in it, and we weren't really happy with it. And they, at that same time that we were looking to go in 24-track, they'd taken on a big contract to supply a number of consoles to a big film studio, CTS Studios in Wembley. So we were kind of a little bit down the chain with them by that time. And they couldn't provide us with what we wanted. And that's how the whole thing started, because by that time, I'd become manager of the studios. They'd made me manager. I'd worked there for 3 years. This was like 1971. And I'd always, from the age of 15, 16, dabbled in electronics. And I built my first console when I was 17. I got a press cutting with me in the local paper with my very first console that I built.
Wow.
And I'd always dabbled because I'd always wanted to own my own studio. I never wanted the record producer career path, which is what all the engineers did. They became record producers.
Right.
I didn't want that path. I didn't feel I had it in me to be a record producer. And so I always thought I wanted to perhaps own my own studio. The only way I was going to own my own studio is by building my own equipment. So I'd been dabbling in the background, building a console. And I kept that going for a number of years. And kind of what happened was that a guy called Barry Porter joined us as a maintenance engineer, you know, looking after the equipment. And in my downtime, I would talk to Barry and get his advice on circuits. And say, what do you think of this circuit? And Barry would guide me. And it became obvious to me that Barry was a pretty good electronics engineer. So he'd help me, and I built a little mixer on circuits that he'd help me with and whatever. And that actually was the forerunner of the Trident B range. That console I built for myself became the Trident B range, which is why it looks so different from the A range.
I was going to ask you about that. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd become manager at Trident Studios, and then we were going 24-track, and I was tasked with finding a console to go to 24-track. And the big problem we had at Trident was the control room. The space for the console was very small. We only had about 5 feet to get the console in. And we'd always had remote patch bays. to save space. We'd always had a patch bay up on the wall. So I was tasked with finding the console for the studio. And the manufacturers at that time were Neve, Helios, and Cadat. They were the English manufacturers. API hadn't really got into England. And I think at that time they only did like a 4-bus console. I'm not absolutely sure. MCI was starting to make consoles, but hadn't again got into the market.
Yeah.
So our choices were really English manufacturers. And we went to all of them to get a console. And we wanted some unusual stuff. We wanted EQ on the monitor section. And EQ on the monitor section was anathema. It was like complete taboo. Do not mess with the monitor section. The reason we wanted EQ on the monitor section was Roy Thomas Baker. We used to get tapes in from America to play back, 8-track tapes, but we were on CCAR characteristic, European characteristic, and the tapes came in from America, NAB. So we'd get a client come in, want to do a playback, and we'd have to completely realign the 16-track recorder just to do a playback.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So Roy said, look, if we had some EQ on the monitor section, we could just, I forget which way around it is, you either boost the bass and cut the treble, or cut the treble and boost the bass. Can't remember which way round, but he said if we had some high and low EQ, we could do a pretty good facsimile of how NAB would sound on a CCR machine. So that made sense, right?
Yeah.
So we went to all these manufacturers and we said, we want EQ on the monitor. Well, we don't do EQ on the monitor section. We don't do it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And when we looked at the available choices, they were all way too big. They were going to be like 7 foot long, you know. They were going to be very expensive, and they didn't have what we wanted. Nobody made a 24-bus console. We were only 16. And the turning point was when we came back from a meeting with Neve. Barry Sheffield and I, one of the brothers who owned it, went to Neve. We were wined, we were dined, we were shown all their consoles. And I can always remember to this day, we sat in a room with their sales guys and their electronic, head of, Rupert wasn't there, but the head of their electronics design section was. And it soon became apparent that none of these people had worked a console. They were either sales guys or they were electronics guys. They had not worked a console. So when we started asking for these things, it was not, well, why do you want to do that? Why don't you do it this way? Why don't you do it that way? Or you could have this, you could have that. It was, oh, can we modify this? Can we do this? Can we do that? Nobody questioned what we wanted.
It was an electronics perspective as opposed to a musician's perspective.
Exactly. Or a user's perspective.
Yeah.
It's a bit like, Lewis Hamilton going to see an engine manufacturer and they don't understand what he wants as a driver at all. It's just, how the camshafts work and what's the lifting, all of this stuff. And how does the gearbox? They're not interested in or don't understand his input. And that's exactly what we from that meeting, very despondent. We're sitting in the car and it's quite quiet. And I, as a foolish 26, 27-year-old, having spoken to Barry Porter and Nibblins and whatever, and having started to build my own console, I said, I think we could maybe build our own console. And Barry said, what do you mean? I said, well, Barry Porter, Barry didn't even know Barry Porter. He was just a guy in a room looking after the technical side. And I said, well, I've been talking to Barry Porter and he to do the electronic circuits. And I know enough about the systems. We could put together a console that we want. And so we had a meeting and Barry Porter wasn't in the meeting. It was myself and the management that tried. They didn't know Barry, so they couldn't really, make a judgment about him. They trusted me. So they said to me, if you think you can do it, Malcolm, and you've been with us for 4 years now, we trust you. If you think you can do it, we'll give you a year to make this console. You've still got to do your other stuff, but you can as well build this console. And that's how we started the A-Ray.
So he could tell you of it all, huh? Yeah.
Oh, totally. I look back at it now and I think, bloody hell, did I commit myself to doing that?
No kidding.
It was only ever a one-off console. It was only ever going to be this one console for try. That was all our objective was, just to get what we wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got pictures of me wiring that very first A-Ray, and we built it as a prototype, and it had a remote patch bay. And, you know, the very first session, I think we'd stayed up all night trying to finish it off. And the very first session was an Elton John session, and it all collapsed, you know, things didn't work.
Of course.
Of course, you know, because we, you know, hardly tested it or anything. You get the modules in, and some of the modules had to be hitting with a hammer to get them to fit and stuff like that, you know. But we got it working. We got it working, and the rest is history, as they say. And what happened was that while we were building it, a couple of people, a guy that I'd worked with, a guy called John Congress, who wrote a record called He's Gonna Step on You that the Happy Mondays played very famous. And some guys opening a studio who were friends of Lloyd Thomas Baker said, we're opening a studio, could you build a console for us? And this was to me personally, this wasn't Trident. And I realized that the console I was building for myself, a little B-range type console, would do the job for them. So I said, well, yeah, you know, I could build you a console. And I thought about it, and I thought, do I really want to, you know, start a company up, make consoles of my own and whatever? You know, it's not going to work. So I went to the management again, Barry and Norman Sheffield, the owners, and I said, look, a couple of people have approached me to build them consoles. And I think we could build a console for them. And they said, well, what type of console? And I said, well, I'd be building a little console for myself. This would fit the bill. So again, they said, okay, if you think I can do it, you know, we'll let you do it. And that's how we started Trident Audio. That's how Trident Audio started.
Almost by accident.
It was based on their faith in me,
Uh-huh.
basically, you know, their faith in me, and my ability to do it. And it was blind leading the blind. It really was. But somehow, you know, and as we started, we just got flooded with orders. You know, we just got flooded with orders. I took one of the A-range modules out to the AES show, I think in about 1973 in New York. And I showed it to a couple of people. And I remember somebody banging on my door, a hotel room, and said, are you from Trident Studios? I heard you're from Trident Studios where Elton John records, you know, and you've got a console or something. And I showed him this module, you know, and yeah, we got orders that way. I mean, it was, you know, it was an amazing time, Daniel, an amazing time, and the Trident reputation and everything else. And the thing about the Trident consoles was that we designed them with our ears. We designed them with our ears.
The musical approach as opposed to the engineering approach. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I mean, you know, I think we should, I'll say this off the record. I watched Bruce's video about the A-range, you know, and he's quite critical about, it was unbalanced. They didn't use transformers. These guys did this and they did that, and, you know. Well, there was a reason for all of that, you know. There was a reason for all of that. And there's this whole, I mean, we could spend hours talking about this. There's this whole myth about transformers and everything else, you know, how all the great consoles had transformers. The only reason these great consoles had transformers because we had to use transformers. We didn't have the technology. Transistors were relatively new, you know, we didn't have op-amps. And so to build, it was much easier just to use a transformer than to try and build a differential input, you know?
Makes sense, yeah.
And the only reason that transformers were used in all the early consoles was that they were mostly made for broadcast. And with broadcast, you're running long lines. You're running lines maybe 100 meters long from microphones.
Yeah.
So you have to have immunity to RF and EMF interference. So a transformer gives you that perfect common mode rejection.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we use transformers, you know?
Yeah.
I've preached this for so many years that when you're in a controlled studio environment, apart from the microphones, which do of course need to be balanced, you don't really need balanced signals because you've got the grounding sorted. You're not worried about electromagnetic interference and running low impedance lines over long distances.
Yes, it's a much more controlled environment in that sense.
Much more controlled environment.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
I've always, you know, they're like, of course, the Series 80s weren't balanced. They work this big myth about balancing just gets me. It really does because, you know, it's not the be all and end all of things.
Sure.
You know?
Sure.
And you know, I remember Bruce in the video, oh, because it was unbalanced and it was just, well, yeah, of course it was. Didn't need to be.
Hmm.
And if you're an electronics guy and understand that, you know the reasons why, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's just some of the myths that have grown. Transformers doing half a sound. There's no question about they do have a particular sound. But again, it's not the be all and end all of the whole thing.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Now you mentioned Bruce, and of course, you know, I want to weave my own limited knowledge into this. Of course, I came up. My first job in a studio was at Cherokee,
Cherokee, yeah.
and at that point, they had just acquired their fourth A range.
Right. Yeah.
And one of the stories that Bruce tells, and I remember this actually from his brother D, who, you know, at the time was, of course,
Joey and Bruce. Yeah.
yes,
he
exactly.
was the older one.
Yes, he was the older one, and he was the grand poobah with the golden ears.
He was the one I always dealt with. It was D.
Yeah.
Joey was kind of the young kid, and he was always the joker. You know.
Yes. Yeah. And then, of course, there was the dad too. He was.
That's right.
He was quite a character, and of course, you know, we could go on all day with stories about that. You know, that I to this day I swear that, you know, Spinal Tap is nonfiction. You know, but
definitely.
But one of the things that Dee had said even back then, and Bruce reiterated this recently when I chatted with him, was that when they first checked out, they were looking for a console for their studios, and I guess they got a module or a couple of modules from Trident at the time.
Yes, it's in his video that they tried.
Yeah. And as Dee explained it, basically they said, well, we want one of these, and Trident responded, well, we'll get you one in a year. And they said, well, then no, the deal's off. And so I guess you shipped them an existing one.
I don't remember that. To be totally frank with you, I do not remember that. I mean, if Bruce says that, but I can't imagine we had that many orders and it would be a year. I mean, it was a limited production of the typified module. You know, I mean, they're labor intensive to produce. It's all screened wire. You know, it's all because, and the reason for that, Daniel, is we never intended to make it a production console. It was a one-off for the studio.
Right.
So we did production engineering it. You know, it was purely a one-off product for ourselves. So we never thought, oh yeah, because when we make this, it'll be easy to do. So we just literally, because we hit the ground running, we just had to copy what we've done. We actually spent 2 years reverse engineering it to get the circuit diagrams. Because we didn't have any circuit diagrams. I had scraps of paper. I laid out all the printed circuit boards and I just did them with scraps of paper. And I didn't.
And had to go back and figure out what you'd done later on so you could document it. Yeah.
We employed a guy for 18 months to reverse engineer all the drawings to get the Trident handbook.
I love that.
Yeah. So, and the second one that we produced was for Crown Records in Japan. That was an introduction from Dolby. I can't remember how far down the line the one for Cherokee was, whether it was the third, fourth, fifth, because we did one for South Africa, Sutbell Records. I think Cherokee was about the fourth or the fifth, maybe. The very first one for Cherokee would have been around the fourth or the fifth. I cannot, you know, I won't, you know, deny or confirm. I can't imagine that we would have said it was a year's delivery. Just can't. It's not in my mindset that we would ever have quoted a year delivery. You know,
well, you know, all sorts of memories get distorted over this many years, of course, you know. But you know, the point being that obviously you created a monster in the sense that you had no idea what the demand would be, right?
No, we didn't. And it was difficult to, you know, I realized, I mean, what happened was we were producing the A range, and then of course op-amps came in, you know, and that started the Series 80 off with the Animal entirely.
Yes.
And then we realized that, you know, look, by that time we were a company, you know, we had about 20 employees, we were, you know, and we realized that we could not continue manufacturing the A range. And I didn't have it in my head that the A range was this, you know, incredible sounding console that was an iconic legacy
It was your
product.
first effort.
It was our first effort, and people were buying them. It was great. Nobody at that time, to be honest with you, nobody was saying, this is the most amazing desk I've ever had. This sounds... They weren't saying that. They were just buying them, installing them, and working with them. We knew Cherokee loved them. We knew they liked them. But, it wasn't... In other words, we weren't going, you know what, we can't stop producing this because it sounds so amazing. We have to keep producing it. It wasn't in our mindset.
Well, if you think about it, back then, there wasn't that much to compare it to.
Not really, no. No, there wasn't. We were very unique. We were a rock and roll company, and roll console company. We understood rock and roll. We understood rock and roll engineers. Neve didn't. They were a very...
They were broadcast.
Stiff sort of company. Everybody wore white coats, and
Yeah.
And I spoke to Rupert at a show must be about 15 years now. First time we really sat down and talked. And I said to him, look, Rupert, I'm not a trained electronics engineer. What I've learned through my ears, and what I've played with, and what sounds good, and put it together. And he said, I didn't realize that. We could have worked together. And we should have done. Because Rupert said the opposite. He said, I don't understand, I'm not a recording engineer. He said, I build stuff to what people tell me to build. So we were quite opposite.
Well, there were very few people who really bridged that gap. I mean, maybe Les Paul, and a few others, but very few, because they were really distinctly left brain and right brain trains of thought.
Absolutely. And I still, I'm not a trained electronics engineer. I'm not completely theoretical and whatever. I know how circuits work and what to put together and what sounds good. I cannot, and I'll say this, I cannot design a circuit from the ground up. It's not what I do. It's not what I do. But I know what sounds good, and I know what works together, and I know how to put things together. And that sometimes is better than knowing the theory, because the theory can actually get in the way.
Exactly. It's a case of, to a certain extent, if you don't know the rules, then you're more apt to come up with something else. Yeah.
I work with a couple of very, very good, really good, ground up engineers who've got PhDs with this as well. And they tell me, I've learned from you, Malcolm, they've learned from me what things work and what things don't work. And they sometimes ask me questions, well, if I did this, would that be okay? What do you think should work? Because it's a different mindset. It's a different mindset because it's like having, an engine driver design the engine.
It is. Yeah, it is. And if you think about it, because what we do and what we're involved in is this really odd mix of art and technology.
Exactly. Yeah. And sometimes the technology can take over too much. And I think that's happened a lot these days because everybody, is trying, looking back to my days and going, well, what made these consoles great? Oh, it must have been this. It must have been that they had this. And it's not. It's just a mixture of a lot of things. And it's a mixture of a lot of luck and a lot of chance. And, I did a post the other day. I did a post on LinkedIn about my new console. And I said, the great thing about this console, it's all through hole. There's no surface mount in it to make it easy to service. And this guy came back and he said, but, through hole is getting difficult to get. And he said, some of these new ICs. And I said, I don't use new ICs. I use GLO72s, GLO71s, and E5534s. 5532s, and he came
ancient technology.
And he said, there are better ICs than those. What about the new generation of op amps? And I said, yeah, but all the great sounding consoles use those devices. And I said, they are rock solid, they're bulletproof, they never fail. You can put them in backwards and they still damn well work. And, they sound good. And then the guy came back to me and said, yeah, carry on, Malcolm, carry on. Because there's all this myth that so many people say, oh, there's better transistors, there's better this, there's better that. Maybe there are. Maybe there are. Everything's got its weak points. And I trust what I know. So I use it's that simple. The circuits that I use in my new consoles are the circuits that we used 40, 50 years ago, because I know they work. why reinvent them? Why reinvent the wheel? Try something different when you know what works. And the other interesting observation, just very quickly, with Rupert Need, we were talking about EQ and curve shapes and everything else. And I told him the curve shape that I used, and he said, well, that's funny because I use exactly the same because engineers have told me that sounds good.
It's funny because what you're talking about here is something that I think was really prevalent in that day and age, which was what I refer to as the what if philosophy, which is kind of, instead of, well, these are the rules and we follow them, it was kind of, what if we try this? What if we take something that shouldn't work or something that was designed for a completely different purpose and we use it for something else and see what happens? A lot of it was really just throwing stuff against the wall, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, because again, I want you to remember as well, I think it was Dee or somebody, we installed, because I went over there and installed the consoles at Cherokee. And I remember that they had this guy that was like a broadcast engineer, very sort of, done all the broadcast stuff, done transmitters and whatever. And he measured the phase shift for our console. Well, I never measured phase shift. I didn't know how to measure phase shift, Then he said to Bruce, and Bruce could probably remember it. He said, this is terrible phase shift and whatever. And they said to me, well, what do you say about this, Malcolm? What about this phase shift? Caused by the transformers. And I said, how does a saxophone sound through the console? Does it sound good? And they went, yeah, of course it does. That's your phase shift for. It's that simple. It's a technical issue, but it doesn't matter. It's all about how it sounds. We didn't know about phase shift and stuff like that. We just, it's all those inductors that we're using causes the phase shift. But, that's what creates the sound. And we use these. The A range, the people that listen to it, Roy Thomas Baker, Ken Scott, myself, a guy called Robin Cable, Barry Sheffield, we listen with these things. We'd take a little, Barry Porter and I would take a little breadboard down, plug it in and say, what do you think? And Roy Baker would go, oh, a little bit of top end dialing, a little bit of this. Oh, that's better with that. We'd go away and modify it. He'd go, yeah, that sounds good. Okay, that's what we use, It was designed by committee. Mm-hmm. It was designed with our ears. And it was designed by what sounds good. We then looked at distortion. We then looked at noise. We then looked at other aspects, But the most important thing was how it sounded. And if it sounded right, And unfortunately, Barry Porter and I fell out. Well, he fell out with the company because Barry was a great engineer, but he was one of these engineers that always wanted to get that last 0.00% distortion out of it. And always get that little extra dB and this and that. The problem was we had mortgages to pay and deadlines to meet,
Yeah.
And we used to say to Barry, look, Barry, we've got to stop here. We've got to stop. We've got to, this works.
Got a record to get out. Yeah.
Yeah. We've got to build a console and not tell Cherokee it's a year's delivery. So, and Barry didn't like that. He didn't like those constraints. His feeling was you shouldn't have these constraints. You shouldn't have a financial constraint. You shouldn't have a time constraint. And he actually left the company after about 4 or 5 months because he didn't want to be corporate. He wanted to go home at 5 o'clock and, I'd be there till midnight trying to get stuff out the door and it just didn't suit him. And so we parted company, amicably, but we parted company. And it was a shame because he was given shareholding in the company like I was. We were given a salary and we were told, you've got 25% of the company each, you've got a salary, make it work. And I was determined to make it work. And Barry, unfortunately, lovely guy, and a great designer, went on to work for Kodak and other companies, great designer, but, not suited to the corporate life and not suited to a company trying to get off the ground with the constraints that you have,
Yeah. Well, and that was also a part of, everything that was going on during that era where music, the recording industry was becoming more corporate. Recording studios were becoming more corporate, and yeah. I mean,
private, the small studios were growing. There's Olympic, of course, which had always been around. There were a lot more studios saw Trident and went, oh, hang on, there's a market here. So there were a lot more studios opening up. And in fact, the main studios like Keller and Pi closed, because they thought, hang on, we can outsource this. We don't need these high overheads. So they actually, the world changed. The world changed. You're quite right.
Yeah. And I think that also, to a certain extent, that probably shaped the direction that you guys went in, because at that point, there was a completely different market. It was no longer, we're just making rock and roll records. It was money in rock and roll.
Absolutely. Yeah. We had a very diverse client base. We were dealing with, we sold a console to Roger Waters of Pink Floyd, Brian Johnson of AC/DC, he got, we were selling to Phil Engineer of Roxy Music. We sold consoles to musicians, which never happened, in the late 60s.
Yeah.
By the 80s, we were selling to musicians, we were selling to the smaller studios. It was a diverse marketplace,
Well, and people were putting in their own home studios at that point for the first time.
Yeah. And America was always a big part of our market. I mean, America was probably 6% of our market.
I believe that. Yeah.
It really was. Somehow we resonated with America because we were a rock and roll company. We resonated with the American market, definitely.
Well, and I think that's, again, I'll refer back to Jeff Emmerich's memoir and a lot of what I know of the era. A lot of the American sound, quote unquote, was becoming very influential to the UK recording industry as well. When you talk about bass, you mentioned earlier having no bass sound. That was one of the things that I know that Jeff mentioned to me in a previous conversation, was the idea that McCartney came to him and said, "I want to hear my bass, God damn it!"
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the bass guitar. Yeah, the bass was the poor relation. You listen to a lot of the 60s records, the bass guitar is way down there. It was not an important instrument. I think engineers, myself included, to a degree in the early days, what's the bass guitar all about? What does that do? It kind of drags along, that's for the drummer. We were concentrating on getting the drum sound. We were concentrating on the bass is the poor relation. It's true. It is absolutely true.
And he was doing these wonderful bass lines, and really putting a lot of effort into it, and you wanted to hear them. Sure.
Absolutely. And McCartney especially, absolutely brilliant bass player. This is something bass, it's just notes are just where they need to be, not where they don't need to be. And,
well, as you can see, I'm a bass player. And so, very influential to me, among, many other bass players. But again, this had to do with that sound. And I guess that was the whole quote unquote American sound,
And the problem was bass got in the way because, we didn't have the speakers really to cope with it in some of the smaller studios. So, turn the bass up and, it's distorting a bit. We better take it down, we didn't have that capability. One of the interesting things about Trident Studios was that the guy who owned it, the guy behind it, Norman Sheffield, for all his faults, he fed up very badly, he couldn't. But for all his faults, his vision for the studio was incredible because he'd been a drummer and recorded at studios like Abbey Road. And what a lot of people don't remember is that Abbey Road was very, very structured.
Yes.
Royal White Coat, you went to the canteen closed at 5 o'clock. If you wanted a microphone, you took a chitty down to a guy in a little office, handed in the chitty, and half an hour later, if you're lucky, you got the microphone. It was very structured.
Yeah.
And you see the engineers there, they're wearing 3 jackets, smoking a pipe, as a recording engineer. It was very, very corporate. And the thing that the Beatles loved when they came to Trident, and the vision of the owner of Trident Studios was he'd been to American studios and seen how relaxed and how laid back studios in America were. We were uptight in England. We were very uptight. We had the class structure. We were very uptight in England in the 60s. Everybody had their place. You Yanks didn't have that. You were, just go for it.
Yeah, the white coats and the brown coats and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So Norman had been to American studios and he loved the way that everybody was relaxed. There was no structure, that everybody just, and he set up Trident with the vision that, if you wanted to get a cup of tea at 3 in the morning or a sandwich, there was somebody there to make you that sandwich at 3 in the morning, or go out and get you a plectrum if you needed it at 5 o'clock, or whatever it might be. And when the Beatles came to, they loved it. They absolutely loved the freedom that they got at Trident Studios, which is why they did some more recordings there. And, I recorded McCartney. I engineered for I think one of the only records McCartney produced back in the day, a record called Those Were the Days, by a lady called Mary Hopkins.
Yeah.
They tuned up to number 1.
Yeah.
And I engineered it. And he loved that. They loved the atmosphere at Trident. It was so different. And people forget that,
Well, that was the prototype for American studios as well. Because that's what we evolved into. It's a service industry.
Well, you already had it. That was the point. You had it before we did. And, and the whole, we've been, I think, to Motown and studios like that and seen, this whole way that they work, these hit factory type of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what he wanted for Trident. And that's what it was. It was much more laid back than any of the other studios in London who still had this structure, this corporate structure. And that's what made Trident so great. It's what, James Taylor, he always talks about how he loved being in England, making his first record with the engineer with it, with Peter Asher producing. And you could tell he was loving it, absolutely loving it, because swinging 60s, England, what a great place to be.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I'm so fortunate and lucky to have been part of that. Just so lucky.
Yes, I mean, I sometimes wish I had been, been involved 10 years earlier to see a lot of these changes because, my God, in
that 10 years between like 68 and 78, different world.
Yes, very much so. And it's fascinating to me to see really the evolution in that time of not just culturally, but in terms of the technology, how the technology almost mirrored the culture.
Really? Yeah, I mean, for years, like from 62 to 68, it was 4-track. It's all you had, 4-track, 4-track, 4-track. Then in 68, 8-track came in. By 71, we'd gone 16-track. By 73, we'd gone 24-track.
Incredible.
Yeah. And so for a 5-year period, literally 5-6-year period, we went from having 4 tracks to 24 tracks and then syncing up to 24-track machines. So the evolution was incredible.
Well, Adam Mosley has this poster that he showed me of the first 46 track.
Yeah. Yeah. It was 46 track because you had a track on each machine to strike the time code.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm fascinated also, logistically speaking, you had this little skinny, tall building in an alleyway where, how the hell did you even get things in and out of the door, for God's sake?
Well, the funniest story is the A range, because there's a picture of me wiring it, and I was wiring it on the 3rd floor. And I was wiring it on the reception desk on the 3rd floor. It was an old printing works. That's why it's narrow and deep.
Uh-huh.
And it's also very tall because they knocked the ground floor and the 1st floor into one. So you had this ceiling height of about 20 feet. The studio was like 60 feet long. And you looked down onto the studio.
It's like a railroad flat almost. Yeah. Yeah.
Were really interesting. But as you said, it was skinny, long and skinny, narrow. And I built the A range on the 3rd floor at Trident. And when it came to getting it down the stairs, Norman and Barry, the 2 brothers, Barry said, I told you it wouldn't go down. And we could not get it down the stairs. And they had the most God almighty row. It was like 9 o'clock at night when we were trying to get it down for this first session. They had this effing and blinding God almighty row about the fact that the console was not going to go down the stairs.
Well, maybe we have to build the studio up here.
We had to kind of take apart, and it was just hilarious to hear these things. They were going out hammer and tongs about how Barry said, I told you it wouldn't go down the stairs. And all. Well, it would do. I'm sure it would do. And get his tape measure out and measure it. Because it was a twisty staircase, to get it down the stairs.
I'm fascinated. You got a grand piano in that place,
Oh yeah. Well, that's true. But it was, to get into the studio, you came in off the street, and it had like quite a wide 4-foot wide doorway, and you literally came in off the street, and then there were stairs straight down to the studio. So to get the piano down on its side, could get it down on its side, it wouldn't have been too bad. Getting stuff into the control room was difficult because that was through the reception area. You had to get things round through there. And there was this huge sand-filled door because we were right by the reception area, so we had to have isolation. It was this huge sand-filled door. Yeah. I mean, the other problem we had at Trident, you had terrible standing waves. I mean, the acoustics in the control were not good. You could move your head from side to side and the bass would disappear,
Well, because you had all these parallel walls, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was acoustically treated and everything else. It was all acoustically treated by a guy called Sandy Brown who'd done acoustics for the BBC, but it wasn't exactly on top of his game,
Yeah.
But we made some great records. What can you say?
Now you were not involved with then the quote unquote second life of Trident Studios, right? You were off on your own by that point.
I'd moved out. We moved out in 74, around 74, to a factory in North London. Trident, by that time, they had a whole number of companies. They had a television company, and they had a video company, which became quite a large video company. Used to do Wimbledon tennis and all of this outside broadcast. And that company did the iconic Clean video, the Bohemian Rhapsody video, with the Mamma Mia, Mamma Mia. That was done by Trillion Video, the video company. And the reason why they have all those echoes of Freddie is they've got this new bit of kit, this new bit of video equipment that could make these echoes, and they thought they'd try it out. And that's what they did. So that was done by Trillion Video. But they also had the largest cassette and cartridge duplicating company in Europe. So they made tape cassettes and cartridges and stuff like that. And they'd had a factory in North London, and there was some spare space there, and that's where I started my company.
Now, so this was this the second coming of Trident, or was this Malcolm Toft Associates? Which
and I moved in there, so we started off.
So this was now you then evolved. When did Malcolm Toft Associates come into play in all of this?
Not until the 90s.
Okay.
I sold Trident in 88.
Okay.
Then I started Malcolm Toft Associates in 91. I had an agreement that I wouldn't compete with Trident for 3 years. And I went into doing finance studios and other things. And then a guy in America contacted me. And he said, this guy had been our dealer in Los Angeles. And he said, have you ever thought of doing a console again? So I said, well, I was a bit taken aback, sort of thing. And he said, I asked him whether you're still making console. So I literally did some drawings of what I thought would be a replacement for the Trident Series 80. And I called it the 980. Malcolm Toft Associates, the MTA 980. And in those days, we had fax machines, and I just faxed him some drawings. And he came back and he said, guy wants to buy one. I said, what do you mean? He said, guy's bringing the drawings, he wants to buy one. And I said, but he doesn't know me. He said, oh yeah, the guy knows you. And he sent me a $10,000 deposit.
Motivation.
Yeah. So I thought, I've got to start a company. And that triggered me building the MTA 980, which was my version of the Series 80. But it was a good console, that 980. A good console, yeah. So that started me back in the console business. And then, funnily enough, in 1996, just a few years after I started, Trident closed its doors. Trident closed, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So, because the people that took it over weren't music people.
And that happened with a lot of companies in that era, unfortunately, and this, that there's something that's, again, we go back to the whole left brain, right brain thing there. There were a lot of many brilliant inventors, both on the recording end and also even on the musical end. You had guys like Robert Moog and Alan Perlman, brilliant inventors who were just terrible business people.
Yeah. Well, Rupert Neve, I mean...
Yeah, there's another.
Wasn't the best businessman, in everything himself.
Yeah.
And I've had my ups and downs, I've been taken advantage of really badly by people, unfortunately. My trusting nature, I won't go into all of that, but I've had some, difficult times by trust because of trusting people and, that trust not being, returned, shall we say.
Yeah.
It's because it is there's a lot of envy, there's a lot of greed in this business, you know,
Yeah.
and because it's quite a sort of designer kind of industry, you know, you know, and there are people that want a part of what you've got and want to take a piece of that, and, you know, they want to, you know, et cetera, and it's difficult. And, you know, doesn't always mean that you can stay on the straight and narrow with people, because unfortunately some people are out for their own ends, you know.
Yeah.
I've always been a very trusting person and believe what people tell me, because that's how my folks taught me. And unfortunately, it doesn't always work out that way, you know.
Well, it's what's that old Woody Guthrie line about, you know, some people rob you with a gun and some with a fountain pen, you know?
There you go. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. You know.
Yeah.
But hey, all I can do, still got my passion, still enjoy what I do, and that's all I can continue to do.
I think that's wonderful. And, you know, I mean, I think it's fantastic that you're still doing this and still at it, you know.
Daniel, if people still want to buy the stuff that I make, then fantastic. You know, I'll keep on doing it, quite honestly. And I enjoy it. I enjoy the design side of it. And I love it when I talk to people and they go, wow, I've used the Trident, or I've done this, or, you know, use this console or whatever, you know. It just fills me with pride, you know. And, you know, I was given an honorary doctorate in 2023, a visiting professor at Leeds College of Music, and I never thought I'd get accolades like that, you know, and it's amazing, you know.
Well, you weren't doing it for that, you know, you were doing it because you had a passion.
I didn't ask for these. They offered them to me, you know. I didn't go, oh, can I have? You know, like, oh, we'd like to give you a visiting professor. Oh, okay, you know, great, you know. But yeah, it's nice to be recognised. It's nice, but that's not what drives me, you know. Well, part of it is, you know, it's the fact that if I can still contribute, you know, to this industry, and in a sense, I can put a few people straight on, you know. I mean, I've done a series of tutorials called All About Recording. I don't know whether you know. I did a series of tutorials called All About Recording. And the idea really was to dispel so many of these myths about recording. I looked at a lot of YouTube about mic techniques and EQ and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And these guys, they're just talking, you know, there's one guy talking about microphone vocal recording, not talking about the acoustic environment at all. Just talking about microphones and putting compression on and doing this and doing that. And you go, it's not about that. It's not about that. You know, it's all about having the right microphone in the right acoustic position, you know, in the right space, and, you know, et cetera, just basics. And what I say in my tutorials is that it's not about spending money. You don't need to spend money. It's not about that at all. It's about understanding the equipment, what types of equipment work, you know. I talk to people about acoustics, say a duvet. A duvet is your best piece of acoustic treatment. Hang a duvet up in your room, and you're 90% of the way there to creating a good acoustic space, you know?
Yeah.
Because you can take a duvet down. You don't need to spend a fortune on these types of acoustic treatments. You know,
it goes back to that same thing you were talking about earlier about those old Motown recordings, and even, you know, you listen to some of those early Rolling Stones tracks, and, you know, there's a ton of clams in those. I mean, the mistakes are everywhere, and, you know, but it's, you know, this is the thing that has always, it's one of the flags that I wave all the time, the idea that we're not doing this for the gear. The gear is not what's important. What's important is what we're doing with the gear. It's all about creating art.
Let me tell you a quick story, right? I'm working with Tony Visconti, okay? Tony and I are great friends, right? This is way back. This is like 1968, 69, okay? He's a great friend of Tom Dowd. He knows Tom Dowd. Right? So he says, Tom has sent me a track-by-track layer of RESPECT, Aretha Franklin, the 8-track, right? I wanted to have a listen to it because he said they recorded it with what they call nets. They go straight into the tape machine, literally, and just control the volume. Maybe we should try this, okay? So he plays back RESPECT, he plays back the individual tracks. The drums sound lumpy and woolly. There's a bit of bass on the drums, right? The bass guitar has got saxophones in it and all sorts of other stuff, right? You know, and the guitars are here, there, and everywhere, right? And you go, there's no separation. There's nothing on this at all. But you play the track back, my God,
It's magic.
Sorry, it's BCT. Because it wasn't a multi-track recording, it was a live recording. Everybody was together. Yep. They were playing together. That's what made the record. It wasn't the technology. They could have recorded it on one microphone and it wouldn't have made a difference because it's the musicians. And that's what people forget. You can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear.
Exactly. Well, we call it polishing turds, yeah.
Absolutely. And I've worked on sessions where you listen to a band and you're going, the song is not very good. The musicians aren't very good. Why are we triple tracking the vocal? Why are we dropping in this bass line, and trying to comp this together and do that? Because I tell you what, whatever we do, this turd ain't going to make it, and we're just wasting everybody's time. But you can't say that to the producer.
Of course not. Of course not.
And you get another band in, and they just everything falls together, and you go, that's a hit record.
Well, and it's so funny because so many times you hear, people saying, well, I've got to have this particular piece of gear because so-and-so used it on this record. And, I could give you the exact same setup that they used at Abbey Road. You're not going to create another Beatles.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, it's like Brian May writing his guitar.
Yeah. Yeah.
Old Red, whatever it's called. He uses a sixpence that's been filed down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it was his guitar tech was talking on YouTube or something, and said a couple of people have picked up his guitar. They can't make it sound like Brian because they haven't got his fingers and they haven't got his plectrum, and it doesn't matter what it is, it ain't going to sound like Brian May.
Exactly right.
And this guitar, as soon as you walk the stage and you play it is that simple. There's more to it than technology, and people, unfortunately, because today people don't, they don't go through the apprenticeships and they don't go through the learning curve. They learn it all off YouTube. They learn it all off recording schools, or whatever it might be. And, they learn it by rote. They don't learn it by actually listening to the music. They think that by doing it this way, because they've been taught, they'll get the best out of it. And
yeah, and this is, this is part of the curse of YouTube University,
Oh, totally. Yeah. It really is. And that's why I did these tutorials. I just tried to dispel it. But, people want to watch it, that's great. But, I just thought I would do it because I was so pissed off with what I'd seen on YouTube and other people have been spouty,
Well, I know that there are a lot of people who are grateful you have done this, and just appreciative of your work.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for making the time to have this conversation with me. This is, again, as I said to you, I cut my teeth on the A ranges, and for me, there has never been another console that sounds the same.
Thank you. Yeah.
And so knowing that you created the whole thing almost by accident makes it even that much sweeter.
It was completely by accident. It was not, there was never any intention. It was never like, I want to start a mixer company. I want to do, it completely just, we didn't know where it was going to take us, where it was going to go. There was no preconceived idea. It was like, as I said, the management said to me, well, Malcolm, if you can make a go of it, great, up to you now. We could have sold 3 or 4 consoles and it could have all died, whatever. No, we didn't even think about it. We're too young, too young and innocent to think about it.
Well, that kind of summarizes, that summarizes the whole era, doesn't it? We really had no idea what we were doing, but damn, did we get it right,
Absolutely. And unfortunately, there aren't those opportunities now because the technology, you go into things like AI or writing code or whatever, there isn't that same maverick approach that you can really take in the same sort of way.
Yeah.
You can't trailblaze in quite the same way. It's difficult.
No, you can't.
Not without a ton of money behind it, and a ton of people. There's not the opportunities.
It's not the money, though.
Certainly not.
Yeah, and that's just it. You can throw as much money as you want at it, but it's not going to be the same because that magic isn't there now.
It isn't there. That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Anyway, I'd better get on and let you. And it's been lovely talking to you, Daniel. So there's a forum tomorrow, is there? Would you say?
Yes.
A forum with.
Yes. Well, I'm chair of the AES section in LA, And so I put these together. And of course, I'm still in touch with Bruce. He's my ex-boss, and and of course, I'm in touch with Adam Mosley, and then I know you've spoken to Brian Kehew in the past, right?
Yes, we've spoken to Brian in the past.
Yes. And Brian and I are we go back a ways as well, and we've worked we've talked about doing this for quite a while because we're both Trident fans for a long time, And in fact, there's a book that Howard Massey wrote years ago, Great Recording Studios. And I am working, I started working on this with a gentleman named Mark Rubel, who passed away a couple of years ago. And I am working on finishing the U.S. counterpart to that Great American Recording Studios.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are a few.
Just a few, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you go on and on, don't you, with Great American Studios.
Oh yeah. And so that's a massive project that I do in my copious spare time,
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, but so this, the more I get into this, the more of a deep dive I do, the more fascinated I am by it all. And so this is wonderful and a rare opportunity for me to get some feedback from you directly on it. And so I very much appreciate that. Yeah, I
always like talking to people about it, and sometimes just tell some of the myths, and and also tell some of the stories, really, because a lot grows up about it, and a lot of misinformation, stuff like that, and
a lot of memories, a lot of brain cells have faded over the years.
Our memories obviously not as good as it could be. I can't remember a lot of stuff. Remember some of the memorable parts, but I mean, to meet Tony Visconti after a couple of months, and we hit it off so well, and I engineered with him for so many years. And we're still great buddies, I've told him everything he knows, I mean, how does that happen?
I'm chasing him down right now to be on my show. So, I want to get that piece of the puzzle in there as well,
Yeah. He's a lovely guy, Tony. Lovely guy.
Yeah.
So we go back a long way. We were both starting out, I just started Trident. He'd just come over from America. And, we started with this guy called Mark Bolan, doing this band. And I remember Tony said to me over the talk mate once, he said, "Hi, Mal, what's your star sign?" And I said, "I'm Taurus." I said, "I'm Taurus." And he said, "So am I, we'll work together." And we've worked together for 3 years, And
then the other wild and crazy guy I interviewed a few years ago was Shel Talmy,
wow.
Crazy American. Yeah.
He is, yeah. He was difficult to work with. He was
an interesting fellow. Yeah, we'll leave it at that.
Doris Day's son, wasn't he? He's Doris Day's son. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Quite a character. Yeah.
It certainly was. I'm trying to think of the other guy at Trident. He did. Perry, Richard Perry.
Oh, Richard Perry. Yeah.
Difficult guy.
Yeah, he had a reputation of being interesting to work with. I understand.
Yes, he was. Yeah, he actually. We've been trying for years to put a film together at Trident Studios, trying to make a documentary, and the big stumbling block is we can't find any footage. There's no film in Trident Studios.
Yeah,
and the only footage that's there is of Richard Perry with senior moment. But Ringo Starr's in there and a couple of other people. Can't think of the guy's name. Anyway, that's about the only film footage that there is of Trident. It's just not enough to fit out a film. We've been trying to make it since 2016, something like that. A lot of people are interested, but you can't just have talking heads.
Well, and that's the thing. Nobody carried around cameras at that point,
You're not allowed to. This was the point. There's only a few photos of me at Trident because you didn't do selfies.
Yeah, exactly.
I couldn't come up to Paul McCartney and say, "Hey, Paul, can we have a photo?" I would have got sacked.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
The camera in and asked for film, and I just didn't think of it. Just didn't think of doing it.
Yeah, of course. We were too busy. You were too busy working.
Well, too busy working, and there was a project called and you didn't do it. It's like working on a film set. My daughter works in film. They confiscate your cameras when you go on set.
Yeah.
You cannot take camera. You cannot take your phone on set. It's just not allowed. And it was the same in studios.
Well, and that's the protocol that I always worked by as well. You know, I mean, as I said, I worked at Cherokee. You know, we had rock stars coming in all the time. You're not gonna confront them and say, "Hey, can I have a photo with you?" It's ridiculous,
Exactly.
you know.
You
Yeah,
couldn't do it. Even if you know, like I was engineering for Paul McCartney. No way. It didn't even cross my mind.
yeah.
Not even cross my mind that I would ask him for a photo.
We were just
You know,
privileged to be there.
Absolutely privileged to be there. He was a lovely guy to work with. Really, really nice. You know.
Mhm.
All the people that have really made it are really nice. All the people that haven't made it are really horrible.
Yeah,
'Cause
pretty
the
much
people
always
that
the
made
case.
it,
Yep.
the people, as you know, as an engineer, if the headphones aren't right, that drum sounds not right, the vocal doesn't sound right, it's too loud, it's too soft. You know, they're playing everything but themselves for a bad take. You know?
Indeed.
The good artists, they just come in and they do it, and they've got all the confidence in the world, and you're home dry. You know, that's
It's the
simple.
truth. It's the
Human
truth.
nature, Daniel. Human nature.
Indeed. Indeed.
Anyway,
Well, Malcolm
anyway,
Toft, thank you so much for being my
my
guest.
pleasure.
I
My
appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Nice talking to you, and hope the forum goes well.
Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.